DBA is an organization that ST Genetics is really proud to partner with. We find that a lot of their core values and missions align with that of ours, such as bringing people together to promote technology, sustainability, and growth within the dairy community here in Wisconsin to continue to have it thrive. So on behalf of ST Genetics, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Albert de Vries. Albert de Vries is currently a professor in the Department of Animal Sciences at the University of Florida. He grew up on a dairy and swine farm in the Netherlands. He attended Wageningen University, where he received his bachelor's and master's degrees in animal science with a minor in agriculture economics in 1991. In 1995, de Vries came to the United States to pursue a PhD in animal sciences at the University of Minnesota, with a focus on dairy science, applied economics, operations research, and statistics. After graduation in 2001, he accepted a faculty position at the University of Florida. De Vries currently teaches 2 undergraduate dairy courses and advises undergraduate dairy students and graduate students. He also serves as undergraduate coordinator. His research interests include optimization of culling and replacement strategies, statistical process control, economics of reproduction and genetics, and precision dairy farming. In his extension role, he works with the allied dairy industry and dairy farmers on farm financial management, valuing investment opportunities, and applying the results of dairy systems management research. Welcome, Dr. de Vries. At the end of this session with Q&A, we just want to remind you to use the microphone in the center of the room so that our virtual audience can hear the question as well. With that.
Yeah, thank you, Amber, for that introduction. I think I'm going to walk over here. It's nice to see snow and ice again if you live in Florida. I've been there for 20 years. Of course, I went to Minnesota, so I remember. It's also nice to go back to 70-degree weather tonight again. Yeah, some of you were here for the previous speaker on animal activism, and I lived this real life. We had an open house at the University of Florida Dairy Farm in 2019, and we had protesters. And so I'm sort of the lead organizer. I had folks with signs in my face, and I became a celebrity on Facebook live streaming and so on. There were 20 folks that didn't like what we were doing, but we escorted them off, and all the other 2,000 people that were there really appreciated us opening up our farm for the public to see what we were doing. Okay, well, now we're talking about the genetics impact and genetics impact your on-farm feed bill. I have to admit, this is the first time I give this talk, so bear with me. There's also a lot of numbers in it, okay? But since it's a business conference, maybe that is okay. All right, so what I want to do here, a little bit of marginal thinking, some slides that have been around for a long time, and then being invited to come speak here. ST Genetics asked me to talk a little bit about EcoFeed, and then focus on the feed safe trait that the CDCB, the Council of Dairy Cattle Breeding, came out with. I'll talk a little bit about some other traits, and I'll wrap this up, all focused on genetics and feed cost. Okay, well, this morning I looked at what are feed costs, and feed costs are the biggest bill on the farm, right? So this is USDA data, feed cost per 100 pounds of milk sold, and they stratify that by herd size, small farms to really large farms, and half of our milk bill goes to pay for feed expenses, right? So does that mean there's a lot of opportunity there? Well, the reality is there is opportunity if there's a lot of variation, right, between farms and between cows. Then we have opportunity. If everything was fixed, it could be a big bill, but we can't do anything about it. Well, it turns out in genetics we can actually move the needle forward as well, in addition to all the other things you can do management-wise to work on feed cost. Anybody seen this slide before? Not too many hands. Okay, that's good. So a slide from John Fetro, Mike Overton, and Steve Eicher, okay? Years ago, really. All right, and so a little bit about marginal thinking, and I want to illustrate maybe an error some of us make, okay? What do we mean by margin, okay? So if profit is revenue minus cost, we agree on all on that, sometimes we call it margin, right? What's your margin? Okay, we're profitable. Well, if margin really is milk price minus my average cost, assuming that's the case, and assuming that the milk price is given, that means we have to reduce our average cost. And that in general is true, right? The next step then, which is, here's where our logic sort of break down a little bit, is we have to cut expenses where our most money is spent. Number one, feed, right? Not saying you have to cut expenses is a bad thing necessarily, but we can make an error there. And let's look at an example here, also from the same slide set, okay? Your nutritionist gives you 2 rations, all right? So you can either produce milk at 80 pounds a cow a day or 90 pounds a cow a day. To make 80 pounds, dry matter intake is 48.8 pounds. To make 90 pounds, it's 53.1 pounds. The higher producing cow eats a little more, right? Well, this is the cheaper ration, 12 cents a pound. This is 13 cents a pound, right? I can calculate feed cost per day now. Well, 80 pounds times what this cow eats, 48.8 pounds, times the price is $5.70. And this other more expensive ration, $6.91, right? So if I divide then my feed cost per day, $5.70 over 80 pounds of milk, that is $7.13 per 100 pounds of milk. And the bottom one, $6.91 over 90 pounds is $7.69 feed cost per 100 weight, right? So what ration should I choose here? The top ration, that's the lowest feed cost per 100 weight, right? And that's the wrong answer. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be showing you the slide here, right? Milk is $20 a 100 weight. So we've seen the first part of this slide here, right? But 80 pounds sold at $20 a 100 weight is $16. And then I subtract my income per day minus my $5.70 feed cost is really $10.30 income over feed cost per day. Where this bottom one here, I now sell 90 pounds at $20 a 100 weight, is $18 income. Yes, I have a little higher feed bill, $6.91, but my income over feed cost is $11.09. Actually, I gain 79 cents by feeding the more expensive ration, but it did make me more milk. Okay, and so their conclusion was that average feed cost production or cost per 100 weight can be very misleading if you're not making volume, right? So profit is the margin and volume. And we'll see a little bit of this thinking coming back towards the end of this talk here. So talk about genetics, right? We really want to breed more feed-efficient cows because if the cow can make the same amount of milk, eating less, that'd be ideal. Ideally, we make milk out of air and they don't eat anything, right? But the problem is that we feed many of our cows like this, and we need to know if we want to do any genetics, right? How do these cows, what's their individual feed intake? And if we just feed them like in a group like here, we don't know. Right, so, okay, so what we need to do, we need to have individual feed intakes, and that's where most of the genetics around feed intake and genetics is today. We have a small group of animals where we collected individual feed intakes on. That's called phenotypes. The phenotypes are really matched with the DNA of these animals. Okay, that gets us prediction equations, basically. And then if we're just looking at a new animal that has a similar pattern of DNA to an animal that's in the reference population, where we already have phenotype, say on feed intake and milk production, then we can predict how feed efficient animals are on new animals for which we have no individual feed intakes on, not even on their daughters, for example. Okay, the principle basically of genetic selection with the genomic testing here. All right, so we need individual feed intakes. And first I have a few slides here on EcoFeed from ST Genetics. Do I work with ST Genetics? Well, actually, the ST Genetics rep in the Southeast is a guy who likes spreadsheets a lot, and he says, you know, how do I show value on dairy farms? And that's what I like, right? I like to show value on dairy farms, not in a particular product, but I think through that conversation, I think I got enrolled into this talk here and talking about EcoFeed. So this is a slide from ST Genetics. It's maybe a year and a half old now. So they measure feed intake and performance, and we'll see that later here, on individual animals. I think that is primarily heifers, okay? Over at least 4,000 at ST Genetics facilities there. All right, and then they estimate an expected feed intake based on performance. Well, what is performance? Performance is the body weight of the animal, and actually you have to calculate the metabolic body weight. You have to do it to the power 0.75. This was developed in the 1950s, really, to get to the metabolism part of the body weight. And there's also an average daily gain in there, right? And so if we use how much energy or how much feed is used based on sort of the known science, then we can predict a dry matter intake for an individual animal. Well, next is what you do is you go actually look at what does this animal eat, right? And sometimes they eat more than predicted, and sometimes they eat less than predicted. And that is then the residual feed intake. The residual is, we don't really know what it is. We haven't not been able to explain it. If we could explain it, it would be in our equation there, but we can't. Right? That's why it's residual. So actual minus expected is residual feed intake based on body weight and average daily gain. And you see that like here's expected, here's actual. And then if the animal actually eats more than expected, the black line is expected, that is a positive residual feed intake, which is undesirable. She eats more than expected. And here she eats, these dots here, these animals ate less than expected. And that's a negative RFI, and that is desirable. Okay, and then EcoFeed is calculated as 100 minus the RFI plus 10. Minus the RFI, we'll see that later too, because this is already confusing, if you think about it, right? A negative number is good. And for many of us, we'd like to see positive numbers being on the good side of the scale. So if you take the RFI, you put the minus in front of it, then you're converting it. So a positive number there. So average is 100 for the population. And if we're just looking at a sire here, the sire C has an EcoFeed score of 110, and that's really an estimated breeding value. Okay, but 110 means that his daughter eats 1 pound less feed. Okay, and so 1 pound less feed, and that is then, we'll see on the next slide how much that is worth. Okay, and this is the other side. This is a 90 EcoFeed score, and this heifer then would eat 1 pound more dry matter there. And so if we follow this heifer on the next slide, okay, she eats 1 pound less, has an EBV of 105, and that is her here. It's an EcoFeed index of 105. Well, if the feed intake is 1 pound less per day than herd mates, this is an SFAT feed intake. And in the math here, this is an ST Genetics slide again. If we assume 10 cents per pound of SFAT, and if you do that, have this gain for the whole year, right? And that is a savings of $36.50 for a year. 1 pound, 10 cents a pound as fed times 365, $36.50. Okay, and this is just that same animal twice as much as highest score. We'll look at these feed assumptions a little closer here, because this assumption is a little different than what the CDCB uses, for example, for feed cost. All right. Well, we went through an exercise a good maybe 2 years ago almost, right? So EcoFeed is not in the net merit index, okay? The net merit index from the CDCB, which I like a lot because it's all economics, it's dollars, it's an index in dollars, which I like. All right, it's also a USDA, so I think it's, there's good science in it. I sort of know all the scientists. I think they do an unbiased, fair job of trying to collect or calculate what makes a profitable animal. And so I'm going to create some marginal values of what is EcoFeed worth if we were to add it to a net merit index, okay? And so here, this is a sire of 102. Actually, then that's in a breeding value. The PTA is 101. And because the net merit is in PTA units, I converted this all to PTA units as well, right? So I just, it's half between 100 and the EBV, as gets the PTA. So the EcoFeed here is just, so it's just a little higher than 100, right? 2, that makes it in the PTE scale of 101. And so that is 0.2 less feed per day. If we do this for a whole year, 365, that is 73 pounds saved. If 50 of that is dry matter, then that is 36.5 pounds less dry matter. Now, if we set on the previous slide 10 cents feed cost as fed, then I think that's 20 cents dry matter cost. Okay, and that gets us to a marginal value here of $7.30. I think that's this times that number there. Marginal EcoFeed. So this is now at the same scale as the net merit index is, as we will see. Well, this was all measured on heifers, right? So what about cows? Is a prediction on feed intake for heifers, does that translate into cows eating less or more? And the data at that time was the correlation between feed intake for heifer and the cow was 0.37. So it's, it's not 1, it's also not 0. There is somewhat of a relationship. And I go through the same math as before, and I won't go through every little detail here. And I'm saying here that per day, so that is 0.074. It's a very small number saved, but she does this throughout her productive life. That's about almost 3 years of life. Same cost here, and that would be $6.32 at the same scale as the net merit is. All right, so there's a gain here as a heifer, and there's a gain as a cow. That's the exercise I went through here. Now, can we, and my attempt is here to add that EcoFeed score to the net merit index, the 2018 index actually that we worked with, okay? This is ST Genetics data, and the correlations between EcoFeed and many of these other important traits here were all close to 0. So say, hey, this is a trait that if you select for it, you're not affecting any of these other traits. Okay, so if that is the case, then we could just add the EcoFeed additional or less cost for feed on top of the net merit index. And I did that in this example here. All right, so this is the 2018 net merit, not the current one. We'll talk about the current one next here. Okay, so we had, I think, 14 traits there: milk fat, protein, productive life, somatic cell score, body weight composite, udder composite, phenol-X composite, the pregnancy rate, calving ability, heifer conception rate, cow conception rate, livability, and health traits here. And then this is just one animal here. Okay, so this animal makes 2,000 pounds more milk. She makes 80 pounds more fat than the average cow that has zeros for all of these. Okay, and then I multiplied that by the economic values. Okay, and then that, if you do that and you don't have the economic values in this column here, that gives you the gain here on these individual traits from this animal here. Okay, if I add them up, this animal would have a net merit of $756. All right, I sort of do that math, all the time. It's traits, it's the PTAs times the economic values, and you just sum them up there. Well, if this animal also had then an EcoFeed score of 105, and that's 5 times the marginal values on the previous slide, that would be an additional $36.50, and for the cow, an additional $31.60. So on top, that is what, $77, $78. If I add the 78 to the 756, that'd be $824. All right, I basically walked you through a calculation here. Yeah, why did I put the slide in? I wondered why I put the slide in here. It's maybe because yesterday I was in Boise, Idaho, and I talked about beef on dairy, which is another topic I love to talk about. And there, the talk was really about we have to consider change in genetics, genetic lag, when we're looking at beef and sex in our dairy herds. So we're not talking about that here. This show, though, that if we're looking at the PTA for net merit dollars, that we see a gradual increase over time, right? Genetically, our cows were getting better from all the traits in the index. The index changes occasionally, and previously this gain was about $35 PTA per year, and since we've started using genomics and especially select better bulls and faster, that slope now is about $75 PTA. Okay, and I did more here too. And so in the blue would be the cows. The cows are lagging the sires. The difference we call genetic lag. It's a little side story here, but I thought I'd show you that we do actually make progress on the net merit here. Okay, I'm switching now to feed saved, and actually first residual feed intake and body weight composite from the CDCB. All right, that was a major revision in 2021. New traits, early first calving, heifer livability, and feed saved. Actually, feed saved is a combination of CDCB's residual feed intake and the body weight composite, which already existed. All right, and so the goals were the same as before, better health and growth of calves, better feed efficiency of cows, and again, maximum lifetime profitability. Lifetime, that is in the net merit. So the data that went into the CDCB traits, feed saved, I think there's 2 main sources here. There was actually a big grant from USDA. It was led by Michigan State. They had about 4,700 cows where they collected individual feed intakes on, mostly at research stations. The most data actually came from Wisconsin, Iowa, Maryland, Florida. We did add data to this data set too, and you see the other states. And they, these researchers collected lots of daily records on feed and intake, and they measured milk components, body weights, body condition scores, and health. Much of this data was not collected because of this grant. Much of this data was already collected because we do studies anyway. We feed a different kind of additive on feed. So as part of all the research studies we do anyway, and we collect individual feed intakes on about a good 80 cows almost constantly at the University of Florida. And so that data, since we had it anyway, was then added to this to this large database. And then when the grant was over, there was another effort, another funds needed. That's still ongoing. About 3,600 cows. Wisconsin, Maryland, Florida is in there, Michigan, Iowa State. And I think they're trying to get Canadian and European data in there, because there too, they're looking at individual feed intakes. This is maybe a little dated now, but these were the institutions that gave data to this data set from the CDCB. And so I read in Horch that there's about 8,500 cows in there now, right? This is this reference population. We also have the DNA on those animals, so we can do correlate genetics with feed intake, and then we can predict on new animals what we think their RFI, residual feed intake, and these other traits are. Yeah, nothing fancy. This is how we collect individual feed intakes at our institution. We've probably been doing this for 40 years, honestly. Kaling gates, right? So we have about 80 of these. These cows, this cow, they have an ID. They can this cow can only eat here. She cannot eat there, she cannot eat there. And you have to train these cows to say, hey, which of these bunks is my bunk? When does my door open? Because the door opens to just their collar there. And then we have an army of graduate students who feed and collect feed and weigh and so on and do feed analysis. And we have maintenance guys because this stuff breaks down occasionally. Yeah. Well, same idea on the CDCB, right? Can we predict what a cow eats, and then what is the residual? All right, here this is a Mike van der Haar or CDCB slide. RFI is unjustified. Okay, let's start here. So observed dry matter intake, right? So there is milk energy is in there. She produces more milk, fat, protein. That takes dry matter intake. Then there's this body weight to the power 75 again, that metabolic body weight. There's a change in body energy. Does she grow? Cohort means, was she at a certain study? For example, a cow eating at Florida, maybe a less efficient cow because of heat stress that day, right, than a cow at Wisconsin, for example. So adjustment for that. And then the residual is RFI. Okay, efficient cows have a negative RFI. Same idea. You have to predict the biology here. Yeah, so not really unjustified, it's just we don't know the science yet. Because if we scientists were 100% perfect, there would be the RFI would be 0, and we could predict exactly how much a cow eats and where all that energy would go towards to. Two economic values then in the new net merit, okay, 2021. And they assumed 11 cents per pound of dry matter. Cows live 2.68 lactations. Actually, that lifetime in the 2021 net merit went down from, I think, 2.8, that was before, to 2.68. It was actually shorter. Cows live a little, stay shorter. We culled too aggressively, in my opinion. And then you multiply that out. Very simple. Pounds of dry matter times number of lactations is 30 cents per RFI, and it's a negative sign because we want to go the other way around. Well, we also want to know body weight, okay, maintenance, okay, in the feed safe, because in the end, what does a cow eat? She eats to make milk, and then she has to maintain her body weight. Okay, and I think in lieu, because we don't really have weights on animals, we have a body weight composite, and the CDCB uses the body weight composite here, and there's these 5 traits in it. Okay, this is from the Holstein Association: stature, strength, body depth, dairy form, and rump width. And dairy form has a negative relative value here. Okay, and that carries the maintenance cost in the net merit index. So the idea is we want smaller cows because there's less maintenance required. All right? Here, I've heard a lot of concerns about this dairy form negative. Anybody heard negative concerns about that? Concerns there? Because the theory goes, and I'm really hearing this secondhand, that if we want the body weight composite to be smaller, less weight cows, and this is negative, that means dairy form goes up. And maybe that's not what we want. At least enough people tell me that's not what we want. But I also hear that gets corrected by the trait productive life, which we'll do at the end a little bit, okay? The math says that today, you know, the 2021 net merit says a cow would eat 4.5 pounds of dry matter per pound of body weight in her lactation, 305 days. How did they get to that 4.5 pounds? So that's really interesting. So you may know there's been a lot of effort to review recommendations for nutrition on dairy cows. And I think that has been published just earlier this year, if late last year. I call it the National Research Council 2021. The previous one was from 2001. And they said maintenance dry matter intake per pound of body weight per lactation is 3.4 pounds. Now the CDCB and the geneticists did their own math on top of that and said, nah, that's an underestimate, it's actually higher. 5.8, 5.5, 5.9, depending on what analysis you look at. And so for the net merit 2021, they settled on 4.5. Okay, and so this is, okay, that makes sense. Pounds dry matter per pound of body weight per lactation. Then here there's math to get basically to what is that then worth per body weight composite. Well, there's another number here, 35 pounds of dry matter per unit body weight composite. Gives you this number. There's an adjustment, I think, for growth. The same 2.68 lactations, the same feed cost gives you this minus $45 number. And we'll use that later. That's, if you look at all the publications, that's how we put a value on body weight composite. Let's look at maintenance cost, because all these folks so got into you know, understanding basically the energetics and feed cost, there were some additional discoveries, I think. So today, we believe the consensus is about 4.5 pounds of dry matter per pound of body weight per lactation. If you do that on a 1,300-pound cow, then you get to a maintenance cost per lactation of $644. And if you look at the previous net merit, they believe that this 4.5 number was only 1.7 number. So that's a tremendous change in what we think maintenance to maintain a cow's body weight, and we're not talking about production, takes in terms of feed cost. Major changes, right? I mean, more than double in the body weight part. There's also a corollary benefit from that, because it means that the value of marginal milk, making a pound more milk, actually takes less feed than we used to think. Takes less feed than we used to think. I'll get to my feed safety soon. So this is today's 2021 net merit. The numbers that you see here are relative emphasis. It's sort of how much importance do we put on improving the trait. Okay, and body weight is in there for minus 9.4, minus because we want them smaller. And residual feed intake is in there at 3.8%, also because we want them smaller. And actually, this number is pretty low here because the reliability is not very high. There's a lot of variation. We can't predict this very well. Okay, now this new net merit versus the old one, actually, if we continue to use that, we do make faster progress on body weight composite because we put more emphasis on it, and actually more than double increase the speed of residual feed intake, all right? So because we added these new traits to it. Previously, there was also you know, we also bred for more feed-efficient cows by just, but that came from all the other traits, more milk production, fat, protein, and so on. And so feed saved, it's not in the index, but it's basically these two traits together here, and that emphasis today is then about 13.2%. All right, you just basically have to add them up, but we take the negative because we like a positive. I think the Australians came with the term saved first, because that makes a lot more sense, right? I save 2 pounds, I save 5 pounds, I save 10 pounds, and everybody knows 10 pounds saved is better than 2 pounds saved. And when you do the residuals and the negatives, it's very confusing. So just an example here. So feed saved, the PTA, we've seen these numbers before, but there's now negatives in front of them, right? So it's in pounds per dry matter per lactation. I have an example animal here. She is +2 PTA of body weight composite. That means a little heavier than average, but she eats less, -200 PTA of RFI, and I plug these two numbers in my equation here. That means 170 pounds saved per lactation, eaten less, and I multiply that with my economic weights. That means a savings of $54 lifetime, 2.7 lactations. There's quite a bit of variation in that feed safe trait. This is also CDCB data here. I can't even remember actually what, this may be in bulls, in sires that they had, okay? Minus 690 almost pounds PTA to 922. So that's this animal here versus that animal there. If you convert that, if you multiply by the feed cost, then some animals are -76, minus compared to the average, others +101. So there's a range of $180 there per lactation, just genetically. That's only the genetics right there. Yeah, I thought, you know, what does feed saved, is that the same thing as EcoFeed? And so I went to the SC Genetics website, and they have EcoFeed and feed saved as well. And so I plotted this for 141 sires here, and you can see it's not the same trait, okay? Or is it because the reliability is low? And I think the latter is probably maybe the more important thing. Just because the reliability is low, that means on average, you know, we're in the same direction, but if you look at individual animals and you have two traits with both low reliability, you can get, for some animals, you have a positive feed saved and a lower EcoFeed score. And for others, it's the other way around. The correlation was only was 13% here. So I'll leave that for what it is. Maybe for discussion. Let's see how we're doing on time here. Yeah, okay. Well, this was all maintenance, residual feed intake and maintenance. What about production? Okay, cows got to eat to make milk, right? And again, more CDCB data here from the revised net merit here. So we're now assuming that milk revenue is $15.93. That is after hauling costs are out. And if we're looking at 3.5% fat and 3% protein standardized, that is, I think on fat, we say a pound of fat is worth $2.10, a pound of protein, $2.39. And volume, that's after you take the fat and protein out, is basically, you know, milk with any other value there is very low, right? And the feed cost assigned to that, to make that 1 pound of fat is 55 cents. To make that 1 pound of protein is 66 cents. And for the volume there, these are very small numbers, so you might as well ignore them almost, is almost the same, right? So income over feed cost, that's simply 210 minus 55 is $1.55, $1.73 to make a pound more protein. And for volume, it's almost nothing. And this is per lactation. If I multiply this again by 2.68, Then income over feed cost is $4.17 for fat and $4.65 for protein, almost nothing for volume per lifetime. And you will see these also as the economic weights. And we'll do an example with that. Here's my example animal on top here. Maybe it's high numbers, okay, but makes more than 2,000 pounds per lactation, okay, compared to the average at 0, right? 110 pounds more fat and 70 pounds more protein. If I use my economic numbers from the previous slide, that is $29 for the volume, $239 for fat, $169 for protein. Income is $436, but the feed cost is $136, so I subtract them, that'd be a $300 income over feed cost for this animal here. Okay, and I can do again, go from lactation to lifetime net revenue here. Yeah, I'm maybe 3-4 slides, then I wrap this up here, okay? And one argument I've heard against maybe are we afraid getting too much dairy form in cattle is that, well, we fix that by putting a lot of emphasis on productive life, okay? Can cows stay in the herd longer? What about maturity of cows? All right, this is actually a Zoetis slide that I've used for some other talks. And this is simply milk production per cow per day. And then this is parity group, so lactation 1, 2, and 3. And 4th, 5th lactation cows make more milk per day. Actually, they're more profitable, as long as they stay healthy, than this first lactation animal. All right, so we ideally have more of these mature animals in the herd, right? That makes sense. And so I've done some numbers with some analysis we did on our own, first back of the napkin, and then you start calling USDA and says, have you thought about this? Okay, and USDA, before the 2021 revision, they assumed that profit, income over feed cost, basically profit, was independent of lactation number, of parity. It's quite amazing if you think about that, because everybody knew that mature cows are more profitable than first lactation cows. And so I think we helped bring that to their attention. All right, so in the past, they assumed $155, independent of parity. Another thing, I had discussion with him and said, you know what, if we hang on cows too long, yes, the maturity is higher, but the genetics is not as new as is available. All right, the genetic package. So that would argue for we need to bring in more younger animals because their genetics is better. I mean, how are we bringing, we can only bring that feed safe and eco-feed into the herd by younger animals, obviously. All right, and so there's a trade-off, there's a balance between, but I want to milk older cows, but hey, but I also need to bring the genetics in the herd. All right, and so there's some opportunity cost there really for hanging on to older cows too long, but there is now the idea that older cows have higher income over feed cost, and they put this to 0, and so quite a bit of difference here, right? So so if I take first lactation cow versus this third lactation cow, there's like a $600 difference there. All right, they do a little bit with weight and in compound interest, and then they have some adjusted profit numbers now per parity, mostly saying that like 4th lactation cows, 3rd, are more profitable. And what that did is it put an extra emphasis on productive life. It put some extra emphasis on productive life more. And hopefully the argument is that will counter anything negative from maybe dairy farm. What I've not been able to think through is whether does this fact that we now have more, that older cows have higher income over feed cost because they make more milk than younger cows, should that affect our economics of feed safe and eco-feed? and I need to, I don't know, I need to either mow my lawn or sit on an airplane to really think about it, because maybe there's consequences there that we can keep adjusting these economic values of feed if it means that but these older animals are more efficient. But maybe there's no effect. I don't know yet. That was my other trait. All right, I'm wrapping this up here, okay? So USDA also comes up with, we have this new index. What if we continue to use the due index, the net merit, and we do this over time, okay? And so their expected genetic progress is now $84 per year. Earlier I showed you that curve with the red on top and the blue at the bottom, and we were about at 75 pounds. And so maybe, because we have built a little better index, maybe it's 84 given this math now, right? It's actually a bit steep. They also show this then in per 10 years in a decade in estimated breeding values. That is the cow that herself actually, so 2 times the PTA gets you the breeding value times 10, all right? Now if we see this genetic progress either per year expressed or in 10 years, and I use this $1682, coming from some gain in reproduction, some gain in milk production, some gain in RFI, some gain in somatic cell score, calving ability, how are feed costs then impacted? All right, and so in what USDA predicts to be the gain, they predict the gain in 20 years, and this is not in PTA, this is an EBV, 2 times the PTA is, 2,540 pounds more milk, okay, in lactation, 153 pounds more fat, 89 pounds more protein, a lower body weight composite, so that's in the right direction, smaller, and actually lower feed intake. The residual feed intake is negative. Well, if we're making more milk, this is volume, fat, and protein, then these cows are going to eat more. They can't make it out of air, and so your feed costs are going to be increased here by $33, $44, $34, $84, $58, and you gain on the maintenance cost. The gain is $25 there, and the gain is $4. So if I add this all up, I think your feed costs are going to increase by $147 lifetime. Yeah, maybe you come to a talk like this, says, how is my feed bill going to be lower? And I think, if I follow this math, your feed bills are going to be higher, except it's going to be offset by even greater revenues, so your profit is greater, right? And we go back to that first slide, looking at in the marginal thinking. So if your feed costs just from genetics go down, then you're not playing this game, in my opinion. To me, that was revealing when I did that math 2 days ago. So we thought about marginal thinking. It's cost, but what is the revenue? Don't forget about that. We can breed feed-efficient cows. There's EcoFeed, there's RFI, there's the body weight composite we already had, there's feed saved. Maintenance costs are actually much greater than were assumed, at least double. And also the good part is that the marginal value of more milk is also more worth because our total feed costs don't change. In the past we thought maintenance is not so high, the marginal cost to make more milk is pretty, a higher feed cost. And today we know, no, you got to take, the maintenance is a big chunk, and therefore your feed bill stays the same. The marginal value is for a pound more milk is it takes less feed. And maybe if I follow my last slide there, that my increased feed cost could be a good thing if you play this genetics game. Oh, lots of numbers. Thank you for staying with me here. So that's what I have. Questions maybe, yeah? You're talking about the heritability on EcoFeed?
Along with reliability.
Yeah. Well, I can, on the CDCB, I have more data on, okay? And there the reliability is low, like 30% or so, where the genomics ones are high. On the EcoFeed, I cannot answer that. You'll have to visit with the SC Genetics booth. And I haven't seen it. It's not higher than what it is for the CDCB. Here's a question.
So there's no doubt that the feed saved theory is very good. Saving feed, being more efficient. However, are you concerned that it is so dependent, the value of it is so dependent on body weight composite? And that is a trait that we are not so sure we have correct.
Yeah, so
Continue to go down that path and rely on body weight composite to drive feed save, we're just going to make cows not shorter necessarily, but smaller and smaller. And your slide that where you compared EcoFeed with feed save really tells that story, because in EcoFeed, the performance on those animals is completely independent of frame style, where with feed save, it's completely dependent on frame style. And that's concerning to me.
yeah, I hope everybody heard. Okay, I have to repeat that. So what is the concern about the body weight composite in the feed saved? And I hear your concerns. Other people express the same concerns about the body weight composite as sort of the measure for the size of the cow and the maintenance there. And all that I can, I mean, the geneticists tell me that's what we use. We may not have anything different, but I agree we take somewhat of a risk if that is the wrong trait eventually. And so I don't have anything more to offer than what the industry tells me we ought to be concerned about. Yeah.
So a lot of numbers here.
Yeah.
Also, I can't remember how many times I heard assumptions. So the one assumption maybe we should look at is if you're going to create a lower intake, lower capacity cow that's going to potentially make the same amount of milk or more, are we assuming she's going to be able to do that on the same percent of forage, or we're going to have to feed a lower forage, more expensive diet? And I don't see that in any numbers. Instead of 12 cents a pound of ground beef, it could easily be 12 and a half, 13 on a lower capacity animal that cannot eat forage.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good point too. So the point is, would the diet, for example, change if we make the cow smaller, for example? So lots of assumptions. Yeah, and so what I tell you here is basically the scientific consensus of the folks that know this. That does not mean they have all the answers. I'm definitely no smarter than what I've showed here. I think there's a lot of good science in it, but I do hear concerns about the body weight composite. And then, your point as well, I mean, can the cow actually, the smaller cow, eat the forage and so, for example? I don't have answers to that, honestly. But I'd love to hear other opinions, right? We can just have a discussion, and me being the moderator than trying to answer anything here. Yeah, please.
Where you have to put more energy into that smaller cow to get the same amount of milk, which is a higher costing ration. Now I get a kick out of this increased feed cost can be good. Well, what about the 30% it went up this last year? Can't imagine that's good.
Say that, can you repeat that last point?
How feed costs went up 30% this year. How does that shoot over?
No, right. Yeah, so you, yeah. It says can, right? And you gotta obviously follow my genetics there, that if it's through more milk and fat and protein, then yes. No, that can't be good. No, yeah, we suffered the same in Florida, on these feed costs. Yeah, does it get you to think about this, right? So I'm more a messenger, right? Don't shoot the messenger more than I'm not than anything else. It's intriguing. We're in a fascinating business, really.
Well, forage is the cheapest part of the diet.
Yeah, so you're concerned, a small cow would not be able to so much forage, and that's the cheapest part of the diet. Yeah, that seems a fair point to me. Anything else, or Amber?
Thank you, Dr. DeVries, for making the trip up from Florida. We really appreciate your time and your insight into topics like this. And I have just an announcement from DBA that it's time for lunch after this. So thanks for everyone coming. Lunch is sponsored by Quality Liquid Feeds and Vaccinova, and the trade show and exhibit hall B both starting at noon. And then innovation stage sessions start at 1 p.m. also in the exhibit hall B. So thanks everyone
Thank you.
for joining.